The Honorable Sharon Garin is hereby recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon, my dear colleagues, and good afternoon, Mr. Speaker. As chairperson of the Committee on Economic Affairs, I rise on a matter of public and economic concern. Last August 6, 2021, the National Capital Region and a number of cities and provinces were once again placed under the strictest community quarantine classification, the Enhanced Community Quarantine, or ECQ. It is the third time that our capital region, which accounts for about a third of the economy, was placed under strict lockdown. The lockdown was meant to abate, if not lessen, the spread of the Delta variant in the hopes that we would avoid overwhelming our hospitals once again. Some even hope that the ECQ 3.0 would hasten the vaccination program of the local government units. The declaration of ECQ meant the closure of the reduction of workforce of businesses deemed non-essential, which translates to decrease in workers' wages or worse, retrenchment of employees. Since March 2020, no part of the Philippines has been spared from these quarantine classifications, which means that no part of the Philippines has been allowed to completely reopen, whether socially or economically. This has prompted media outlets to call this the longest lockdown in the world. As a result of this protracted lockdown, the economy experienced the worst contraction on record at 9.5% in 2020, with unemployment rate peaking at 17.7% in April 2020. In addition, Director General Carl Chua of NEDA said that each week of lockdown in NCR costs us 105 billion pesos, not to mention the 444,000 unemployed number of individuals. The previous prolonged lockdown, according to the Philippine Statistics Authority, cost us a 16.5% drop on our gross domestic product per quarter, with NCR, the major contributor to the national economy, having the biggest share of the loss. Clearly, Mr. Speaker, lockdown measures imposed on the NCR have a significant adverse impact on the national economy. On a personal note, in the Western Visayas region, my home province, the province of Iloilo, has been under ECQ and MECQ the longest. Despite this, it is still considered one of the riskiest places to visit due to COVID-19. Along with Metro Manila, it is one of the 5 provinces, out of the 80 provinces, 5 provinces under MECQ for the month of September. I have seen the difficulties of my fellow Ilonggos. Our lives have been drastically changed. Movement is limited, livelihood is scarce, and government health and social assistance is sporadic. The extension of the MECQ status in NCR from September to 8 to 15 was declared despite massive consultations with mayors, private stakeholders, and related sectors who strongly recommend the pilot of GCQ with granular lockdown to slowly reopen businesses and provide living for all workers. This despite the fact that no less than DOH has declared that placing areas under ECQ or MECQ is no longer an effective way of reducing the number of daily infections. In fact, during ECQ 3 and the ensuing extended MECQ, we continued to experience a surge in the number of COVID-19 cases, prompting health authorities to acknowledge that the Delta variant is now the dominant variant in the country. Aside from the high viral load of Delta variant, just this Saturday, September 11, we recorded our highest number of new cases at 26,303. ECQ and MECQ might have worsened the situation because of the lack of economic activity that could have produced additional quarantine facilities, oxygen tanks, PPEs, medical equipments, medicines, immune-boosting food and supplements. There might have been new caregivers that could have been hired. There might have been substitutes to our already exhausted nurses and doctors. These are the might have beens had we decided to open the economy and limited lockdown to smaller areas. According to DTI, there are 900,000 businesses that remain closed amid this pandemic, and most of them are micro, small, and medium enterprises. It may not be remiss to mention the temporary shutdown of the luxury hotel Shangri-La in Makati last February, the closing of Japanese car maker Nissan car assembly plant in Laguna last March, the upcoming closure of our oldest appliance chain, Automatic Center, in October, and the filing of Chapter 11 proceedings by the nation's flag carrier, Philippine Airlines Incorporated. Reading these figures and news adds to the sense of doom and gloom we already feel. It is not high time for us to revisit and reconsider. Is it not high time for us to revisit and reconsider imposing extreme lockdown as the immediate preventive or responsive action whenever a new variant or a new matter of threat posed to this country? Is ECQ still an effective way of responding to this pandemic? Why do we heavily rely on draconian measures in this war against COVID-19? According to the ADB studies, even if we ease community quarantine, business reopening ranges only from 45 to 63%, with only 9% in full capacity. Hence, reopening businesses will not instantaneously lead to business recovery. Evidently, no matter how many laws we legislate to respond to the lockdowns, to give ayudas to our struggling countrymen, this only leads to draining the government's coffers. No matter how many laws of Bayanihan series we enact to spur the economy and avoid business closures, it will not be enough. Perhaps now is a good time to remind everyone, the IATF especially, of the old saying, give the man a fish and he will eat for the day. Teach the man to fish and you will feed him for a lifetime. People need to earn a living. Mr. Speaker, I had no intention of speaking before this August chamber had not the National Task Force assigned to COVID-19 response retracted its recommendation to ease the restrictions for the NCR. To make matters worse, this retraction was so belatedly announced that business barely had time to cancel arrangements already made in preparation of reopening. One can only imagine the difficulties faced by businesses when, just as they were starting to recover from March to April 2021 ECQ, another declaration of ECQ was made barely 4 months after. To the business sector, this meant businesses would once again be shuttered and were to remain shuttered longer than what was already intended. The latest decision of the NTF failed to balance the health concerns with the effects on our already struggling economy. We have learned from different experts that strict lockdowns are not only the only way to address the increasing number of infections. We must also admit our economy is not resilient enough to withstand the effects of a strict lockdown. If our minds remain focused on the draconian measures, we will continue to struggle. The lockdowns were meant to prevent deaths due to COVID-19, but aren't we, in fact, trading one cause of death for another? Will it be a comfort to a grieving person whose loved one died of hunger that at least the loved one did not die of COVID? Mr. Speaker, we have learned from the different experts. Mr. Speaker, again, did we inoculate as many as we should have during the month-long lockdown? Were we able to hasten the vaccination program? Or maybe the better question is, do we even have vaccines to administer in the first place? Again, on a personal note, by way of example, the Iloilo province, my province, is considered one of the riskiest provinces with respect to COVID-19, with infection rate not slowing down. In fact, infection rate in Iloilo is still increasing at 17%. But why does it have only 11.45% vaccine coverage as of September 8, 2021? Why is Iloilo province, with 2 million population under MECQ, receiving less vaccines compared to other provinces of comparable situation despite its risky status? RA 11525, or the COVID-19 vaccination program of 2021, clearly provides a mechanism to ensure that all regions get the vaccines we all sorely need, namely by allowing LGUs and private entities to procure through a multi-party agreement or MPA, obtain that much needed vaccines which will help them chart their own COVID-19 destinies. However, we have learned that these MPAs, for one reason or another, are missing the approval of one of the necessary parties to the agreement, the national governments, especially the DOH and NTF. If LGUs and private businesses want to help themselves by buying their own vaccines, why stop them? COVID is here for the long term, hence vaccines will be needed for the long term also. This humble representation, therefore, strongly urges the IATF to recalibrate its pandemic response quarantine measures, implement RA 11525 or the COVID-19 vaccination program of 2021, and distribute the vaccines in a speedy, equitable, and transparent manner. Lastly, as for this August body, I humbly recommend that Congress create a Bayanihan para sa Pagbangon ad hoc committee to act as an oversight body on the economic recovery programs and policies of the IATF. The Bayanihan para sa Pagbangon ad hoc committee will execute reforms, policy reforms, to review and enhance the powers, composition, and performance of IATF. And it will, including the revision of the enabling law creating IATF by possibly converting it from an executive task force to an executive and legislative joint task force. Mr. Speaker, as Bill Gates tweeted in April 2, 2020, if we make the right decisions now, informed science, data, experience of medical professionals, we can save lives and get the country back to work. Mr. Speaker, last year in May 2020, when I sponsored the economic stimulus bill in this same plenary, I likened our struggles in the fight against COVID to a fog of war. COVID war hit us with much speed and force that every Filipino was confused and lost on how to win the war against COVID. But today, the war against COVID is still here. The fog is not there anymore, Mr. Speaker. After over a year, we have learned what not to do and what's best to do during this war. There is no more fog of war, Mr. Speaker. We now know what to do to win this war, enough to make the right decisions to protect our health and economy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.